Ocean Innovation Africa. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning. First and foremost, thank you very much, Ocean Innovation Africa, for giving me this opportunity to present in this very interesting conference, very interesting platform. Myself, Dr. Drishty Ramdenee. I'm from the Economic Development Board of Mauritius, and I head the bioeconomy sector, which is also responsible for the ocean economy. So when I was approached by Alexei to talk on this segment to relate innovation with ocean economy, I did some research, and I think this presentation is very much geared upon the research that I did and the interesting inputs that I have obtained. So very quickly, when we see ocean economy, I went on the website and I saw so many data from container shipping to the new model of aquaculture that needs to be done out of lagoon in very difficult situations. When we talk about the objectives and the ambitions with regard to marine energy, for examples, it does lead us to the fact that for these to be realized, innovation is required. Innovation in terms of technology, innovation in terms of policy, and innovation in terms of research and development capacity. I did a search on internet and tried to see what are the most recurrent themes that come with regard to the big potentiality of ocean economy, and things that come forward are the exploitation of marine resources, deep marine resources, 5,000 meters deep, ocean mining, protection of biodiversity, marine biotechnology, and very interestingly, when we see the relevance and the importance given to these sectors and the number of organisms that have been discovered with potentiality for marine biotechnology development in the pharmaceutical sector, for example, it is impressive to note that for this to be able to happen again, there needs to be high level of innovation and investment in innovation. Similarly, for diversity protection, among others. So going forward, what we also note is that when it comes to the definition of ocean economy, because what I wanted to do, I wanted to compare the level of innovation, the GII index of different countries, the innovation index of different countries, with the GDP contribution and the ocean economy or blue economy contribution to the GDP. But this has been very difficult because one of the main points is that the definition itself and the subsectors that makes part and parcel of the ocean economy varies a lot between different countries, which makes it different to relate and compare the level of investment and the contribution of ocean economy in the GDP. So in terms of the definition itself, we see that there needs to be some kind of tweak, some kind of innovation, at least at the level of Africa and the regional level, to be able to compare and have a good idea of where we are in terms of economic contribution and development. In Mauritius, for example, the ocean economy sector, the blue economy sector, has been structured along a number of sectors: fishing, seafood, aquaculture, deep ocean water application, marine services, seaport-related, marine durable, ocean economy, and they are guided by a number of laws and a number of policies and documentations. Now, when we go again, generally, we see that the strategy of implementation of the blue economy varies country to country, but most usually they are in terms of sensitization, coordination, building national capacity, until policy implementation and monitoring. Now, when we go into Africa more specifically, talking about figures are impressive. But I just went, and you could see on the screen some of the figures which are quite relevant, but we see the size of the maritime zones under Africa's jurisdiction, and also the amount of IUU fisheries in Africa, for example. And the other side, on the right-hand side, you can see the fisheries contribution from Africa. What I want to put as, I would say, inputs here as kind of consideration is when we see different countries, but also continents in the case of Africa, we see that the contribution of seafood and fishing is extremely important. We are talking here on the slides about the US, about the EU, but also a graduated level in Africa, which are the countries which are very much geared towards this sector. But we do believe that for Africa, the potential is much higher. The potential is much higher, and speaking specifically of Mauritius, for example, of course, the bias being Mauritian, is to be able to go more, most of our fisheries is based on tuna. Now, to be able to diversify, we need to have a very good fish resource assessment, which defines the biomass, the maximum sustainable and maximum economic yield, not only for known species, but for more or less unknown species that could help us in attracting investment in those kind of new fisheries and graduating our the level of contribution of fisheries and seafood in the ocean economy, in the blue economy sector. Now, this will require innovation again in terms of the capacity, in terms of the capacity building, but also in the technologies to be able to do these kind of activities. And further to that, when we see the challenges that are looking at us in terms of the requirement for increased compliance with sustainability fisheries, with dwindling resources, innovation and technology is very much important to be able to drive a seafood industry in more niche sectors. Now, going in a more general aspect, when we talk about the ocean economy, as I mentioned, several sectors are being looked into, but there's a need for prioritization because financing is not infinite. Now, what is very important also is that there has been, namely for Mauritius, but more generally, a lack of knowledge also on the impact factor of investment. So it is extremely important to be able to relate for each country or potentially for different regions what is the relevance of investment in terms of cost benefit ratio on the potential growth of a sector, of the subsectors, and also in terms of job creation. So we at the level of Mauritius, we have been we have worked with the World Bank, for example, to define this kind of potential. For example, here, the first figure on the right-hand side, you can see that this work has been done, and it is clear that in terms of benefit cost ratio and job creation capacity, there are certain sectors like fisheries on banks, the fisheries seafood hub, the ICT sector, which are very prime, and this can give some kind of tangible and quantitative inputs for policy formulation, for prioritizing, for financing. Also, it's extremely becoming important that we are able to relate the green and the conservation aspects with financing options, where it becomes extremely important to revive and implement blue bonds kind of strategies. Beyond, also what is important is that in the ocean economy, there are certain sectors that we need to define as, sometimes we define as non-financial consideration. That is, there is not necessarily a return investment from a private point of view. For instance, projects that relates to mitigation and adaptation with regard to climate change. So again, I'm just portraying to you certain work that has been done to work out on projected GDP losses from tropical cyclones, for example, that would most probably influence the need for breakwaters in the port. So what I mean to say here is that very often it is extremely important to innovate in the quantification of the sectors, in the quantification of the impacts, both in terms of growth, but also in terms of mitigation and adaptation potential, so as to improve policy formulation in terms of financing priorities. Now, going into a few of the sectors that we look into, just wanted to share with you, marine biotechnology, for example, is a sector which is very prime for us at the level of Mauritius. We have a Mauritius Oceanographic Institute that is, its main mandate is to work on identifying and taking further research and development in the marine biotech sphere. But when it comes to going to the main objective, the high objective, for example, of leading to pharmaceutical products derived from marine organisms, going through the whole chain from isolation, characterization, trials, etc., innovation is important. But again, beyond the technology aspect and the research and knowledge part, it is fundamental also to have the capacity with regard to policies. Similarly, we have drafted a nutraceutical framework. The same applies. In Mauritius, we have a structure. We are structuring a deep ocean water application project where I want to relate with you the level of innovation that is required. For example, to know that the temperature, the pH, and other characteristics of the water at very deep levels. So there also, in terms of technology, in terms of policy, the concept of innovation is extremely important. Marine renewable energies, we are talking about big penetration by 2050 in Europe, for example. But for a country like Mauritius, when we consider the steepness of the continental shelf, for example, but also to relate to the potential, the wind potential or the wave potential, and to be able to derive from it policies that are relevant to keeping the marginal cost of production of electricity, these kind of projects would not be able to move forward without innovation. And when we see globally, I'm not here relating only to blue economy, but in a more general term, about countries or regions that have succeeded in innovation, we see clusters. And these clusters, they have been able to move very fast because of investment and because of high-level policies that have spurred innovation. And very important, in this slide, what I wanted to convey is the importance of innovation and the correlation of innovation with GDP. It is mostly a straight line correlation. And this would also, through experience that we have, relate also to the blue economy. And where does Mauritius stand? Mauritius stands, we are quite happy that last year we moved some 30 ranks along the GII, the Global Innovation Index, and we are, I would say, an average performing country with regard to the innovation input output. Now, this is where work has to be done also, that is to identify and prioritize projects on a regional and global level in the ocean economy where funding, where efforts need to be put in the ocean economy sector to drive growth. Very interesting data also. It is not, I would say, an actualized data, but it gives some kinds of trend. Are which countries have the most number of researchers per millions as compared and with regard to the ocean economy research. And we know that the first comers, among others, are Norway, Germany, Finland, Australia, France, etc., countries which are very much advanced also with regard to the GDP contribution of the blue ocean economy. And surprisingly for me also, I noted that Mauritius comes just after France in terms of number of researchers per million. So we see that Africa is doing fairly well in this sphere, but of course we need to continue to have the momentum to drive the blue economy framework. So also a citation map. So the citation map of the world where the area of each country scale and deform according to the number of ocean science citations received. Which is also represented by the color of each country. So we see that they are the most developed countries. The color is more, I would say, sharp. So we see that those countries are more advanced in terms of innovation and research publications, whereas lots of efforts has to be done still in terms here, for example, in Africa. But taking on, for example, Mauritius itself, innovation is happening. Innovation is happening. We have a cutting-edge aquaculture project that is operating, the Fair Marine de Maibo. We have one of the best and one of the most technologically advanced tuna processing plant, which is coupled with a marine biotechnology plant, which produces and derives omega-3 from tuna waste, for example. We have a nutraceutical industry, which is thriving. We have a research center, which is the Mauritius Oceanographic Institute. We are getting our port management system on e-system. We are having a liquefied natural gas strategy. So things are moving, but as I put before, it is extremely important to keep the momentum, because getting these kind of projects happening and going to the objective in terms of the contribution of the economy to the GDP ambitions, and also doing same with regard to best practices and protection of environment, innovation, investment, efforts, innovation is of utmost importance. Going through the research that I did, very high level research I did in different policy papers, African policy papers, FAO policy papers, even Mauritian one, and the imperatives that we have, namely to drive further the fisheries sector, the marine biotechnology sector, in better knowing our own resources and having good policies to protect the resources and bettering the commercialization strategy. Few points of thoughts that could be taken further during this forum, during this meeting, or, for example, a Pan-African Research Center in Marine Biotechnology, which could leverage on existing infrastructures, but building capacity, sharing of knowledge between researchers in very niche and competitive and complex sectors, which, for example, isolation of actives for pharmaceutical and cosmetics procedures, a regional fisheries research center, which would support financially and support in terms of capacity to do fish resource assessment, fish and non-fish resource assessment, because of the movement of the fisheries. A more regional approach is very much interesting. Developing regional logistics and brands to have a better known value of the African brand, and also getting implemented certain inherent and very important international conventions. I mean, de-domesticate those very international conventions like the Nagoya Protocol in local jurisdictions to be able to better frame the protection of species, but also the sharing of revenues. So, ladies and gentlemen, I went very quickly because there's lots to say, as you can see. But the main points that I've noted are that there's a direct correlation between innovation and GDP contribution. That most of the sectors that both Africa and the globe looks forward in driving further the blue economy strategy are very inherent to and are very needful for cutting edge innovation, and the importance of regional collaboration and international collaboration bridge systems are extremely would be extremely favorable to that sector. So, on those words, I would be happy to take your views and questions also, and happy to discuss further on how to take further this innovation initiative and how can innovation support the graduation of the blue economy. On these words, ladies and gentlemen, I wish you all a very fruitful conference and fruitful deliberations. Thank you.